It's 9 minutes after 8 o'clock here on 97.1 Wadsworth Community Radio. And in the studio with us, we have Susan White. Susan is a flight attendant and was a survivor aboard United Flight 232 that crashed in Sioux City, Iowa in 1989, where 111 of the 296 passengers and crew perished in that flight. So welcome this morning, Susan.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
Welcome back to town. So give us a little bit of your background first. You're a Wadsworth graduate, correct?
Yes, I graduated in 1982. Shout out to all my grizzly
friends out there.
All my grizzly friends are here, so it's nice to be back here. And then I started with United in 1986.
Oh, and you're still there. Okay.
Yes, I'm still flying, and I live in Denver. I moved there in 1990. So.
Oh, okay.
Why'd you want to do this? Why'd you want to be a flight attendant?
Well, I thought that it was a great opportunity to see the world and get paid at the same time. And it sounded like an exciting career.
Okay. Did you have to go through some schooling or take courses, or did United train you? How did that work?
Yes, United has training. Every airline has their own training, and it was 6 weeks in Chicago.
Okay. And then, of course, you've been doing that ever since, or whatever. Just strictly as a flight attendant. Worked in any other areas for the airlines, or?
A few years ago, 3 years ago, I did some flight attendant recruiting.
Oh, okay.
But other than that, just being a flight attendant.
All right. Well, and again, I know that you're also you're here in town, and our other friend, co-host Trish Easton's back in the corner there. And again, you guys went to school together, right?
Yes, we did. I've known Tricia for many years.
Oh, very good. So, what tell us, and again, tell us about the crash here with the plane and the story behind that.
Well, it was the last day of a 4-day trip, and we were going home. We started in Philadelphia that morning. We flew from Philadelphia to Denver, Colorado, on that same DC-10. We did a quick turnaround, and we took off out of Denver. And about an hour into the flight, I heard a loud explosion, and I thought it was a bomb that went off. Most people on the airplane thought it was a bomb. Went down on the ground to hold on to my jump seat. I was close by my jump seat to protect myself, looking around the cabin, expecting things to be flying around or a decompression at any moment.
Because you were up at...
We were 37,000 feet. An hour into our service, we had just finished lunch, serving the lunch trays, and I was going to the beverage cart to help my flying partner finish the last 6 to 8 rows. So everyone looked around, everyone was curious, and my thought went to Flight 103, Pan Am Flight 103. 8 months prior, had everyone died when a terrorist put a bomb on board, and that's what I thought was happening. So protected myself. Once the plane stabilized, got up, told Tim, my flying partner, we need to get the cart out of the aisle. I was concerned that the plane could nosedive down, and I was concerned about the hot coffee on top injuring passengers. Took the cart out. Then we got an announcement over the PA saying that everything was fine. We just lost our number 2 engine. We still had 2 more engines left. We were going to continue on to Chicago at lower altitude and be a little bit late. And I thought, oh my goodness, I'm so glad that's all it was. Back out in the aisle we went. We finished our 6 to 8 rows. As soon as we brought the cart back to the back galley to pick up, the first flight attendant came back and told us to pick everything up as quickly as possible. We lost all hydraulics. We had no way to steer, no way to brake. We were probably going to make an emergency landing in Sioux City, Iowa, but they weren't sure. We might land on the highway. There was a river close by, so be prepared to go into the river. Ditch is what we call it. So with all that knowledge, I had to go out and pick up all the trays, try to remain calm. And then the other flight attendant came to the back. She was working in first class and had just went up into the cockpit to take a DC-10 instructor that was a past rider. He was commuting home on the flight. He went up in the cockpit. She came back to tell us that they couldn't control the plane. The scene in the cockpit was just pure terror. And they had their hands at the 6 and 12 o'clock position. She was quite frightened. We all were frightened, and we hadn't gone out to prepare the cabin. And then a pilot came up to me in the back, and he was with Eastern Airlines on his 3rd interview with United. And he said, there's a piece missing off the horizontal stabilizer on the right side in the back. And he said this plane could never land safely. He said, we're in serious trouble. Do they need another pilot? And I told him I knew we had a pilot up front. The second officer came back at right about that time after he told me that. And I explained that to him. He looked out. He looked frightened. He was pale. He was white. And I'd known him for 3 years, always jovial, telling jokes. And after seeing Dudley, I was quite frightened. And at that point, he said to me, "Are you okay?" And I said, "I'm okay. Are you okay?" He didn't answer me back. He put his hand on my arm and said, "Good luck." I said, "Good luck to you too." And he went back up into the cockpit. And that's when I went into the bathroom and I prayed to get myself together, prayed for the pilots, the passengers, and the entire crew to remain calm. And then we went to prepare the cabin for our emergency landing and dealt with several of the passengers. One lady was crying hysterically and she kept asking me if we were going to die. She said she can't die. She has 3 small children at home and she needed to be alive. And I hugged her and I wanted to cry with her, but I just prayed that I wouldn't. I would remain calm and have no fear. And then there were other passengers. We had lap children on board. We had over 50 children that day. It was a kids fly free day for every adult ticket. They had a promotion for a penny. A child could fly. So that's why we had so many children. And we had 2 unaccompanied minors that were alone. And there was a gal in my section, Cinnamon, she was 13, traveling alone. So I made sure that the man next to her was going to take care of her. And he told me they already had a plan. The lap babies we had to wrap in pillows and blankets to place underneath the seat in front of me. That's the emergency procedure. Recently they have changed that. And then we had a 4-minute warning. 4 minutes, think about my entire life. And that's when I started preparing myself for death. And I thought about my family and my friends, and I pictured my pastor announcing my death in church. And it's amazing how many thoughts you can think of in 4 minutes. I went back and forth, and then 2-minute warning. And I looked out, and we were going extremely fast. We landed almost twice the normal landing speed, about 250 miles an hour, and 140 miles an hour is the normal landing speed. We crashed down very hard.
No landing gear because of the hydraulics, correct?
But
I mean, you had.
They did put the landing gear down. They thought there might be just a little bit of hydraulics left, and the landing gear did go down. So when we touched down, the landing gear went into the concrete 18 inches, and it was a 12-inch thick old World War II runway. Closed concrete. So that's how, just to tell you how deep and how hard we hit. And there was a huge ball of fire immediately. It was just engulfed in flames. And I said, I'm burning to death. That's how I thought I was going to die. And all of a sudden, chaos. We bounced 3 times very hard on the right side. And pieces of metal started ripping apart and flying around. The rest of the plane, the tail broke off immediately where I was sitting in the tail. The rest of the plane went up on its nose. The cockpit broke off, and then it jumped. First class broke off, and the midsection went upside down and slid into the cornfield. And meanwhile, the tail, we tumbled through the fire, flipping around.
And you were still in the tail section.
Yes, still strapped in the tail and facing aft. So I had 2 lavatories in front of me, thankfully. Because at 1 minute we yelled brace for 1 minute solid, where everyone had to get in their brace positions, and then we tumbled and pieces of metal were flying around the cabin. I had my hands over my head trying to protect myself from metal and flying debris. And I thought the carts were going to come out of the back galley. And they're heavy, about 300 pounds. So I had my legs up in the air. I thought I could hold those carts back. And then a piece of metal came and slit open my pants and my thigh, and another piece of metal slit open my shoe. And so I just kept battling. I was just battling, and I kept my eyes open. The bathroom doors came. We lock them on landing. They came open. We lock them on landing for an evacuation, so the doors will not impede the evacuation. And toilet water started spewing out. me, and it didn't matter. That was the same lavatory I went into and prayed before landing. And then all of a sudden it just became silent after several seconds of violent tumbling, and seemed like we were in a tornado with all the dust and soot coming at me. It was stinging, and it was silent. And I was so thankful to be alive. I was looking around. I thought, now we're going to explode. We just survived this. And I had no idea that we were detached from the rest of the airplane. And I started yelling our commands: release your seatbelt and get out. That's what we say, release your seatbelt and get out. The second time around, the other flight attendant on the other side, who was on the bottom, started yelling in with me, and I was so happy that she was alive.
You heard another voice.
Yes, it gave me so much energy, because I thought she had to have been crushed. I knew I was on the ceiling, and she was down below. So unfastened her seatbelt, and I had to hold on to my harness so I didn't fall to the ground, because I was halfway upside down. And I braced myself with one leg on the side of my jump seat, and I swung my leg around to the wall on the other side. And that's when I saw the big gaping hole and all jagged metal and pieces of metal just all over. And there was a man that was trapped under this metal. And I tried to reach down to grab the metal. For me, I needed to jump down on that before I jumped again. And he couldn't get out, and he couldn't get out. He kept pulling his body, and I told him to wiggle. I said, wiggle, wiggle. I was so afraid that we were going to explode after we had survived this. And I had seen about 8 survivors at that point that got out of the airplane. He wiggled. He got out of the metal, got himself free. I jumped on the metal and then jumped another way down to the ground. It was a long ways down. It was very high. And as I was jumping and running to catch my balance, I could hear people. I turned around, and there was still a man and a boy. They were just hanging in their jump seat. And I grabbed Donna. She got out at the same time as I did. And I said, we need to go back in. There's still people in the plane. We went back in and said, release your seatbelt, get out. He said, we'll fall. We said, we'll catch you. So he released the boy's seatbelt, and we caught him. And then he released himself and jumped down from that high area. And then to come out, there was just devastation everywhere, all debris and luggage and headphones and magazines from the seat pocket and cargo bin. It was a chaotic scene. Ambulances and fire trucks were everywhere, and helicopters were landing. And the Iowa National Guard, they happened to be on duty that day. There were over 200 of them. They all came running. And a rescue worker told us that we were the only survivors. And so after preparing yourself for death, and then you live and you're so joyful, but yet you see all this around you, it was such a chaotic, sad scene. I immediately had survivor's guilt. Mm-hmm. I thought, why me? I prayed on the plane, but so many other people were praying as well. And then people started coming out of the cornfield. And after kind of helping some of the passengers that were injured and telling them to hang on, someone's going to be with you. And then a rescue worker would come with them. All of a sudden, all these people started just appearing. And so I had so much joy and hope at that point. I thought about my flying partners and thought about the pilots and Dudley being my friend. I felt horrible because I hadn't met the pilots, the captain or the co-pilot, and I thought, how am I ever going to meet their wives? And I didn't even know the names or what they looked like. So after about 45 minutes of helping people and helping people find their loved ones and helping some paramedics with other passengers, I saw the pilots over in the distance, and there was my friend Dudley, and there was a big pile of just metal and wire, and they didn't know that the pilots were in there. So I got to see Dudley, and I hugged him and gave him water, and he had a bloody nose, and then we went. We wanted all the passengers to go into the armory, the National Armory, before going to the hospital. So I went in there, and at that point, that's when I finally, that was a little over an hour, I finally had the opportunity to call home, and there were a lot of payphones, and I tried to put my calling card in, and all the lines were jammed. I couldn't get a line because the media had all the phone lines jammed. And a man appeared to me and said, may I help you? And he was the chaplain of the National Guard. And I said, I'm just trying to call home to my parents, let them know I was alive. And he said, I'll help you if you want to come back with me. So went back. I was so grateful. And he grabbed my hands. He said, let's pray. And I was so touched because it was the first time after taking care of everyone for 2 hours that somebody was taking care of me. And I was so touched. And that was the first time that I had tears after 2 hours of being on the ground and an hour and 45 minutes in the plane of taking care of passengers. And we dialed my mom's number, and she didn't have call waiting in 1989. It wasn't real prevalent there.
Hence the calling cards and
yes.
right. I mean, those were the days of the calling cards and the prepaid
yes.
cards and phone booths, right? Yeah.
Yes,
right.
yes. And everyone was calling her, asking her, if I was on the plane. And then I said, may I call my father? And he said, sure. So when I dialed my dad, it was 5 o'clock Eastern time when we crashed. He got in his car in Wadsworth to drive home, and he heard it on the news. And he said he just felt it in his heart. And he called my mother, and he said, where's Susan? Do you know her schedule? And she said, I don't know her schedule. I mean, I didn't live at home, and I was on reserve everywhere. And he said, she was on that plane crash. I know it. And she said, oh, no, Bob, calm down. She wasn't on that plane. There's thousands of flight attendants, thousands of flights. And he insisted that she was on, and she tried to calm him down. And so he called United Airlines, and United said, keep your phone lines open. So when the phone rang, my dad wasn't sure if it was United calling with bad news or who, and he had this slow hello, and I said, Dad, and he screamed and cried. And my sisters I had 4 of my 5 sisters were in the background, and they started crying and screaming. I could hear them. And he said, I know you were on that plane. And I just said, I'm alive, Dad. I didn't tell him I was in Sioux City. I didn't tell him I was on the plane. And he cried and cried. And I felt I was going to cry, but I didn't want my dad to hear me cry. So I looked up at the chaplain, and I said, please take the phone. And I whispered to him, and he graciously took the phone and said, Mr. White, this is the chaplain, and your daughter's standing here. It's a miracle. She's alive. You need to get down on your hands and knees. Thank the Lord. And my dad said, thank you. And at that time, I collected myself. I felt better. I took a breath, and where I could take the phone back. I was worried about it being long distance, and it wasn't on my time. So I didn't want to talk long. And my dad just said, are you okay? And I said, I'm fine. Just can you call Mom? Tell her I'm okay. And he said, I will. And I told him I loved him. I said, I love you. And he said, I love you too. It was a really tearful goodbye. But later I got to call my mom later that evening and talk with her. And then 3 days later, I came home back to Wadsworth. I was never so happy to be home in my life.
So now the airport that you crashed at, that was a regular commercial airport, or was it a military airport?
No, it was a regular commercial, but wide-body planes like a DC-10 did not land there.
Okay.
And the miracle of landing in Sioux City, 2 years prior, they had a drill, an emergency drill, where they had a wide-body aircraft come in and crash. And they were prepared. And it was shift change. It was 4 o'clock in the afternoon, so there were double shifts of the doctors. The National Guard was there. It was a beautiful afternoon, 4 o'clock. We could have been over the Rockies. We could have been on the way to Honolulu, over the water. Everything ended up being a miracle where we landed.
Mm. Your training that you had received, they don't train you for. Did it help in that situation, or can they not train folks like flight attendants and that for what you had to go through?
Well, initial training of the emergency training is 1 week long. It's an extensive training, and every year we go back to recurrent training. We simulate crashes. We have a simulator 767. It's a dual aisle, and smoke. They simulate with smoke and fire, and we do an actual drill where we go through and prep the cabin and get everyone in the emergency procedures. We do that for our ditching as well, going in the water with the raft and the life vests and everything. So the training did kick in completely. And as we were going through preparing the cabin, I tried to tell myself, just pretend like you're in emergency training and going through, and because it was very emotional, but the commands and everything that we have to do, getting the babies wrapped and getting everyone in their brace position, taking sharp objects off, eyeglasses off. So the training did kick in.
Now, what actually ended up causing the explosion then? Was it?
There was a manufacturer problem with the fan disc, and it was about a piece of sand the size of that. There was a crack in the fan disc that had been going around for 15 years. You could only see that from an infrared light. And the crack just decided to give way at that point. And then shrapnel went everywhere, severing the hydraulic line, the main hydraulic line and the two backup systems that they said could never happen, and then sent the shrapnel out onto the horizontal stabilizer and damaging that.
Of course, and again, those jet engines are rotating at thousands of miles or thousands of revolutions per minute. So yeah, that centrifugal force. Another way it cracked, it was like a hand grenade going off.
Yes, and it sounded like a bomb. It was so loud.
How do you you're looking back at it now from 30 some odd years later? Do you think about this a lot? Is it part of I don't want to say you think about it every day. Do you think about it often as to what happened and for whatever reason that you're here with us this morning?
Believe it or not, I do think about it every day. Not that I try to focus on that, but the flight number, 232, I see it everywhere. I wake up in the middle of the night and I wonder, what time is it? And I look over and there it is, 232. Or my flight time on a flight, it's 232. Or a sit is 232. That number is everywhere, and I think that that's there for a reason to remind me to be grateful and thankful for my life and my job and my family and friends. And so I do think about it, but it's not in an eerie way. But I always want to remember to just be grateful and to tell those I love them, and because you never know when it's going to be your last day when you leave home.
Yeah, and again, you mentioned a lot of the training and everything else. Did a lot of that training and confidence, did that help you get back on the next flight? What was it like when of course you're still a flight attendant, what was it like the first time you walked back up the steps or out the tarmac for that next flight?
Well, 3 days later, my dad flew to Sioux City, and we flew home. We had a landing in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, before landing in Cleveland, and it was very difficult. We taxied out past the crash, and I cried. My dad held me, but it was very hard to be on the flight, and every landing for several landings, I had anxiety. And it, to this day, people wouldn't know, but every now and then if we get in severe turbulence and we're coming in with wind or, the plane's rocking in the back, my palms will sweat and it'll give me anxiety. But I still believe that it's safe to fly, and it was just a fluke that happened, and I'm here and I'm thankful. So it's all good. I'm thankful I went back to work. It was very hard. It was difficult. The first time standing there with the safety demo, the first time that I went back and I was standing there, and a passenger, he made a comment about, that, I don't even know why you do that. Nobody pays attention. And I just started shaking, and I said, well, I need to tell you, this is my first flight back after being in an airplane crash, and 185 people survived. So, it would be a good idea to pay attention.
Do you see anybody? You see your friend Dudley or all of this? Yeah.
The entire crew, we are very close. So we call it our 232 family. And for several years, we got together for vacation. We'd had a 3-day weekend, and just last summer, my fiance and I, we went and stayed with the co-pilot and his wife and went fishing, and we saw Dudley and we saw the captain, and one of the flight attendants, we went to his wedding this summer. So our crew is very close, and every anniversary we all email and call each other, and I always thank the pilots for saving my life. They're my heroes. They did an amazing job. They've simulated that over and over, and no one has successfully been able to land. So that's just amazing, a miracle. There's several of the passengers that I'm still in contact with and very close. And in fact, and then on the anniversary date, we text and call and tell each other how thankful we are for each other.
course, I'm assuming, again, when you have all the controls lost, and again, being a pilot, the only control you're going to have is thrust on the engines, kind of going back and forth, just controlling the engines that way. I'm assuming that's about the only control you had coming down, correct?
Yes, that's exactly right. And we were thankful that we had a DC-10 instructor that was flying from Denver to Chicago. He was an instructor in the training center, which is in Denver, Colorado, and he lived in Chicago. So he just happened to be on board and went up in the cockpit. And after they had figured out, the captain, the co-pilot, and second officer, about the engine thrust, the way that they could maneuver the plane, then he was on his hands and knees with the throttles in his hands. Before then, he took the second officer's seat, and he ultimately landed the plane that way.
Wow.
How many perished in the crash?
111, and then a month later, one passed away from the injuries, and then 185 survived.
When you after you heard your fellow flight attendant saying, how to get out, I mean, were you just, and you see people coming out, were you excited to see these folks who you were just trying to explain emergency procedures to see that they had to survive through all of that?
Oh yes, in the beginning when we thought there were only 11 survivors in the tail, that was very emotional to think we were the only ones. And then to see people start coming out of the cornfield, I had so much joy. I was so excited. I couldn't believe it. It was a miracle. And then to find my flying partners, I found 5 of the 7 other flight attendants. I didn't find. We did have one flight attendant that passed away. When I saw Tim, my flying partner that I had been flying with, we worked the same aisle together for 4 days. And he was a nice guy. He's the one we just went to his wedding. Right. And when I saw Tim, they were bringing him on stretcher, I just started jumping up and down, up and down. I was so excited to see him. And the other flight attendants, we just hugged, and we were so thankful.
Where were these 111 who perished? Were they in a particular part of the plane, or were they, maybe some in first class or some in coach or that?
So in first class, there were 28 seats and 11 survivors. The second part from door 2 to door 3, we call that B zone. That's what the part that flipped upside down and went into the cornfield. That's where the majority of the survivors were. From door 3 to door 4, where I was, that's where most of the fatalities were.
Around the wing section, then?
Yes, behind the wing to the back of the plane, yes.
Do you pass along your story to other flight attendants? Not so much, with that, but, it would seem to me that to try to be calm in that situation, knowing you may have 4 minutes to live, and you have to be calm for so many other people, because they're looking to you for guidance, for help, for whatever comfort that they're going to get out of this. Do you share this story with fellow flight attendants, or and try to teach them how to be calm in a situation where this could be one of your last breaths?
Honestly, I do not bring it up.
Okay.
If someone asks me, but I never bring it up at all to any of my flight attendant friends. Well, my flight attendant friends know, but right. I can work a 4-day trip with someone and they'll never know that I was on the crash, because I do not say anything unless they find out or someone tells them and they ask me, and then I'll share the story with them. But it's just it's something I don't really talk about it much. In recurrent training every year, in the beginning, the instructors would always ask me to share. And so I always did. I felt like I did have something that I could share with them, and everyone wants to know, how will you react when you're faced with a situation? And honestly, you don't know. I prayed a lot. I prayed to be calm. I prayed not to have any fear. And I do think that helped me to kind of have a poker face. I didn't want any of the passengers. I knew that my job was be there to inform them, instruct them, and comfort them. And I even though I had my own fear, I tried not to show that.
Okay. Mom and Dad still in town?
Well, my dad passed away 2 years ago. He was had moved to North Carolina, but Mom's here with me right now.
All right.
So
we got to wave, so just so you saw.
So thankful to be here with my mother.
What's it like now after harrowing experiences, albeit it's been a number of years? Is it always good to come back here? Oh,
I love being back in Wadsworth. It's my favorite place, I think, ever. The people are so friendly. I love our class was so close. I mean, we had such a great graduating class, 1982, and all my best friends, my besties are back here. I love to come home, and it's just very comforting to me.
So how long are you home for?
Flying back on Friday morning.
Okay. Mm-hmm. All right. Well, very good.
So a little bit of time.
Yeah.
That's right. You still run into, you mentioned your class was close. Do you see people when you're back here? Or?
I do. I try to. Yes. And
outside of Tricia here.
Yes. Well, yes.
Right. Well, what a story.
Yeah.
We're thankful you and the rest of your friends and family are here.
Thank you.
It's wow. That's all you can say.
Yeah, it really is. So,
Thank you.
Yes.
We appreciate you coming in this morning. Thanks again.
Yes.
Thank you. I appreciate being here.
And we'll see you tomorrow at Lions.
Okay. All right. Sounds good.
It's 40 minutes after 8 here on 97.1 Wadsworth Community Radio.